Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. WitchLit is brought to you by 1000 Volt Press, a family-owned independent publisher established to produce the books we want to see in the world. Titles including Changing Paths by Yvonne Abarrow, Conjuring the Commonplace by Lane Fuller and Corey Thomas Hutchison, A Death in the Dry River by Lisa Allen Agostini, and my most recent book, Verona Green, can be purchased directly from 1000voltpress.com or wherever you buy books. You can also support the show by buying us a cup of coffee at ko-fi.com/witchlitpodcast. Debra L. Burris is a witch, farmer, physicist, and master naturalist. She has a PhD in physics and teaches meteorology, astronomy, and physical sciences at the University of Central Arkansas. She has worked for the National Severe Storm Labs as a storm spotter and as a regular presenter at Mystic South. Debra L. Burris, welcome to WitchLit.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I so enjoyed your weather magic book. I can't wait to talk to you about weather and writing and all that good stuff. But our first question for everybody on the show is, especially, in this kind of age of glut, media-wise, but, any book you could want, thousands of television channels, whatever. Why still write? Why still write books?
I think for me, there's something about having a physical book that you can dog-ear the pages, you can circle things, you can make notes in the margins, you can read under a tree outside. I live out in the country where we don't always have good signal, so having access to online media is not always guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, I grew up I read Dante's Inferno for fun one summer while I was helping my dad bale hay. So I would lay on the trailer under a tree, listening to the tractors running while I was taking a break and read Dante's Inferno. There's just something very grounding about holding that book in my hand and being able to see it. So even though we have the media, the tidal wave of things we can see, I think to really sit and ponder and consider and to be outside looking up at the sky and to really let things sort of percolate, books do that. Whereas, watching a clip, and I love TikTok. I like to look things on TikTok. I like to look at reels sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of time there to ponder.
Yeah.
Right. Where a book, you sit, you read things, you shut it, you think, you open it back up, you look at it again. It gives you time to percolate and ruminate on stuff. Yeah. So that's why I like to write and why I like to read actual physical books. Mm-hmm. It slows me down enough that I ponder.
Yeah. No, I like that. So how did you get from reading Dante's Inferno for fun to deciding I want to be a writer or an academic even?
Well, the academic part is a little more, I'm going to say it was a little more traditional and straightforward, but that's a lie. I tell my students, every year I go in and talk to the incoming freshman physics majors, and they're always like, tell us your origin story. And I'm like, well, don't do what I did. I would love to tell you that when I was sitting where you are, I knew I was going to be standing here today, and that would not be true. I always loved science, and I grew up on this same farm that I live on now. And I was always really interested in the plants and the trees and the animals and the rocks and the sky and the stars. And my mother, we were so poor we couldn't afford to pay attention when I was growing up. We were land rich, but we were, poor. Because, when you own a farm, the way you have a small fortune farming is you start with a big fortune, and it makes it pretty small pretty quick. But there was always time for books. There was, we had the public library was our treat in the summertime when we weren't in school because my mom drove the school bus. So in the summertime, we would go to the library every week. And I was always over there in the nonfiction section, man. I love to read science books. And there was always money to buy a book. Like the grocery store down in this little town that I live in still had a display of little golden books that were science-based one time, and she bought me all of them because they were like, I think I've still got them. They were like 70 cents a piece or something like that.
Remember those? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, whoa. And and even then I was marking things and dog-earing the pages and making little notes and circling things and stuff. And so I think science was always sort of my companion when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked being able to understand how things work and understand the way this weather works and stuff like that. And I was listening to a really interesting podcast just this morning about, I think it was Kat Borealis was talking about how her understanding of science has not reduced her awe and amazement with the natural world. And that's very much the way I feel too. So the more I understood, the more amazed I was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I got into the academic side of things. When I started college, the university that I went to, they were starting a program to send we have a nuclear plant here, and they were starting a program to send all the reactor operators back to school. And I thought, ooh, nuclear physics, that's probably the hardest thing there is. I want to do that. So I did that, and realized at the time, which was, 30 plus years ago now, that they were not going to hire a fresh out of school woman to work at a nuclear reactor because it was full of people from the nuclear Navy. They were just not going to hire me. They didn't need me. They didn't want me. I was green as a gourd, and they didn't want anything to do with anybody like that.
Right.
So I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll go to grad school. I had no idea there was such a thing until my undergraduate advisor said, you should think about going to grad school. And I'm like, what's that? Okay, I'll try that. And so I went. Was not a stellar student, no pun intended, because I'm an astrophysicist. I was not the best student until after my first year, which I really struggled my first year, because coming from a not such a great undergraduate preparation, trying to jump into these very difficult classes. But I met my PhD advisor after my first year in grad school. He gave me a paper to read about how elements were created in stars. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. So that lit a fire under me to do better and to try harder. And, so that got me to my PhD. And I often say, he dragged me kicking and screaming sometimes to that PhD, but I got there. Didn't really know what I was going to do until I taught classes one summer. Graduate students teach in the summer because the faculty want time off. And I thought, I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at explaining things and everything. So I felt a lot of times when you're in grad school, particularly in physics, they think you're going to go on and do research, right? You're going to go do research. And I'm like, I like it, but I don't love it. I love teaching. And so I remember going to John, my PhD advisor, and saying, look, I don't want you to be disappointed in me, but this is what I want to do. And he's like, I would never be disappointed in you. If that's what you feel passionate about, do it. So I was able to start teaching right out of grad school. I got a job at a community college, which I loved, and taught there for several years. I also adjuncted at another university, and then I was able to come back home. So that's kind of my academic pedigree. No plan, just kind of fortune favors the prepared mind. And I kind of, did the things that the universe kind of pushed me, kind of like herding cats, toward this goal. But how did I write this book? Well, I never thought of myself as a writer, and it's still kind of a title that I will uneasily claim now that I actually have a book out. But I taught, you spoke about Mystic South. I was the very first presenter at the very first Mystic South at 8:00 in the morning on Friday morning in 2017. And people really responded to what I was talking about. And so, my friend and high priestess in my trad, Marla Robertson, is the workshop coordinator, and her wife, Gypsy Teague, is the vendor coordinator. And we've been friends for almost 30 years. And they're like, Deborah, you should really think about writing a book, because Gypsy's written dozens of books. Gypsy is a very prolific author. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. That's not something I'm good at. That's not something I do. I'm a good teacher. I don't know how to write a book. And they pestered me for about 3 years until 2 years ago, I finally said, okay. I have an idea that it might be interesting about looking at the intersection of science and magic or witchcraft or whatever you want to call it. I have an idea. So maybe I'll go in there, and maybe they'll like it. Possibly, I don't know. And they're like, Deborah, stop it. Go do this thing. And I was helping Raina Starr with the Desperate House Witches Live podcast, and Heather Green, who was one of the acquisitions editor of Llewellyn, was on the podcast that night. And I had already signed up for the next day to do my little elevator speech. And I was like, So Heather, if someone were doing a pitch, what is the ideal thing you would like to see? And I was furiously writing everything down that she said. And I went up to my room and, luckily part of it is, do you have an outline of what you wanted to write about? And I did, because I had been doing a weather magic presentation. So I had an outline. And then, do you have bona fides that you are competent to speak on this subject? And I'm like, yes, here is my academic CV. So yes, I have that. Do you have a sample of writing? And I'm like, yes, I do, because I have a farm blog on Facebook where I write about things on the farm. And one of the things as a farmer that you're intimately tied to is the weather. So I had written a few, just blog posts basically about weather. So I printed out a couple of those and I took my stuff in, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be interested. And Marla and Gypsy were just rolling their eyes until they almost just rolled out of their head when I said that. But I went in and was selected to move forward. And luckily, the editorial board at Llewellyn said, yes, this sounds like an interesting book because there's not really anything out there like it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see if you can do it. And 6 months and 68,000 words later, I had a book. And I will say Heather Green was really, really helpful to me, because the first iteration of this book was 60,000+ words of word vomit. It was not good. So she really played a very instrumental role in helping me shape it into the book that it is now, in terms of just its organization and, how to present things in a way that will catch people's attention and stuff like that. So that's kind of how that book was born. It was, it was a process that I didn't really think that I had that. I didn't see myself as a writer. I didn't think I had that skill set, but apparently I do. So yeah.
Apparently do. No, I really enjoyed it, the book. And I mean, it's funny you say about the structure, because I think it's interesting how the chapters kind of accumulate, I guess, on top of each other. We'll use all the weather puns we can today. And then the exercises, kind of the way they break it up, and then like take that concept that you've been talking about, either magically or scientifically, and put it into like, this is what you can do. This is like an actual practice to do this. So it's not just like armchair witchery.
Weather magic is definitely not that. I will say that for true. And I'm glad that you said that, because science does accumulate. And I always tell my physics majors that I'm like, everything that you learn is foundational because it builds on itself. Right. And weather very much does that. And I kind of like things where you see the connections, right? If nothing else, I wanted people to see all the tendrils that connect everything. And so I kind of knew that that's how I wanted to organize it. And then I was really reluctant to, and this again is, that whole imposter syndrome thing. I'm like, if I write down this spell that I say, I just made that up. That's not like an official spell or enchant or whatever. I just made that up. And somebody said, well, Deborah, somebody made everything up at some point. So why should you do any different? I'm like, oh, well, that's true. That old imposter syndrome creeps up on you every time.
Well, and I think too, like in witchcraft and the occult, people are also like, the older it is, the more authentic it is. And I'm like, it might have some more like stuff accreted to it because it's been used a lot, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that works.
Well, and sometimes the older it is, the less good it is, because there were some ideas that were pretty, I don't want to say trash, but, not
belong in the trash.
That belong in the trash. Yeah, there's some ideas. And in fact, I just went to a meeting of my trad. I'm a elder in the Georgian tradition of witchcraft. And we had a trad meeting, in about the beginning of April. And one of the things we talked about is we need to be inclusive in our language. And how do we become more inclusive in our language? And how do we bring this trad into the modern era? Because, it's 50 years old or 50 plus years old, and based on things that were even older than that. And, it's not it's not that these things were just not on their radar. Some of the conversations that are being had today were just not on their radar. And we need to be more inclusive, because that's how we keep that trad alive. And I don't practice that particular trad day to day. That's not my day to day personal practice, but there is some value in having that practice in my back pocket of things that I know how to do. And there's something really powerful about speaking words that that have been spoken by a lineage of people in the same way that you're doing them, and you can kind of feel that presence. I like that. And I had kind of forgotten how much I liked that until we did this. And, so one of the things that I'm adding to my rotation of my talks is, here's the value of, this kind of goes back to your question about the book. Here's the value of actually going through the lesson process in a trad. You may not ever practice it. I certainly don't. I mean, I know all the, I don't almost say I know them all by heart, but I know where to look them up, the things to say and the stuff to do, and, all that for our particular flavor of circle casting or ritual or whatever. But there is value in knowing that information. And the other thing that I like about it, as I spoke about Marla, it's valuable to have someone who is your mentor who will call you out and go, you're kind of acting in a messy way. Maybe you need to clean your act up a little bit. So there's a value to that. And so that's actually one of the talks that I've been putting in my rotation recently. Because I think there's, like I said, I love TikTok. I like to watch witch talk videos. I've learned a lot of stuff off there. I've remembered a lot of stuff that I forgot off there, but those videos are never going to call you out and are never going to hold you accountable in the way that a person who you are studying with, or a study group where you banter ideas back and forth, will. So I think that's to me is the primary value of doing that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think there is real value in that. And I think it's harder and harder to find like that either peer group or a mentor, just because we're so fragmented in so many ways. Like, I think if you have it, it is truly a thing to hold on to. As long as that's a good relationship. If it's a bad relationship, you should walk away. But
yeah, if it's a healthy situation. And and that's one of the things that I love about like gatherings, going to especially my local gatherings, but even like Mystic South, being in a room with that many like-minded people is very rejuvenating in a lot of ways. And also it pushes you forward. It pushes you forward in the the conversations that are had. It pushes you forward in your ways of thinking, and it makes you really examine what you believe and what you know and things like that. So there's a lot of value in that you miss by not participating in those things, I think.
So for the book, I was thinking like so many of the stories you tell in the book come from growing up where you did in Tornado Alley and, all of that kind of stuff. And I was just wondering, like, as you're writing the book, did it kind of change your practice or like redirect things in any way? Because I just feel like there's potential there for that.
It did. It made me, I don't want to say be more intentional, but maybe a little bit. My practice is very much, I live it and breathe it in the sense that I don't think, oh, today, on this day, I'm going to do this new moon thing. And on this day, I don't like plan it. It's very much fly by the seat of your pants, unless there is an event or something like that. But my practice is very I don't know what the right word is, but like I have all the stuff, right? I'm looking around this room that I'm in and I'm thinking about my other rooms, and in every room in my house, there are little altars set up. I know so many talented makers and artists that I have an abundance of beautiful wands and athames and altar pieces. And I do bone art. So I've got bone art pieces and I've got things everywhere. When I'm actually doing work, 90% of the time I'm standing outside in a pair of muck boots and my pajama bottoms and a tank top with a stick I picked up off the ground, or banging two pots and pans together because the radio went, I got a weather alert on the radio and I'm out there going, not today. We're not doing this today. We're not doing this today. So it's what it did do for me though, is it's a thing of all the magic that I do is I'm the conduit for it, right? I don't need all the beautiful things that I have. And believe me, I'm your best friend at an event if I like your stuff. My middle name might as well be I'll make your booth rent. Because if I like your stuff, I will go, yes, I will have all of this in this pile that I've piled up over
Makes
here.
a note to sit next to Deborah.
Yes,
if
exactly.
she ever bends.
Yes, exactly. I am your best friend. We have these events here in Arkansas now called the Enchanted Metaphysical and Mystics Market, and I'm a volunteer at them. And my boyfriend's one of the promoters, and I teach at them and I vend at them sometimes, and I help him in his vending. And I have very good friends that vend at it. So I get to go in before it opens. And by the time it opens, I've already spent, all my money. So, but
it is dangerous. It is dangerous.
What it has done for me is it's really driven home to me the fact that everything is connected. There's a great video by Symphony of Science that's like an auto-tune video of Bill Nye, Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Richard Feynman. And it's called We Are All Connected. And it talks about how we are connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, and to the rest of the universe atomically. We are connected to weather. We are just as connected to weather as we are to each other. And I think that for me, it really made me deepen that connection, to think about weather, because I'm an animist, to thinking about weather as a living thing, as a spirit, as an energy that is alive, in the way that plants and trees and everything are alive. And so it did really cement that for me. I've always kind of practiced that, but that really became very crystal clear for me while I was writing this book.
Yeah.
Because I think I don't remember if I said this, but I always say it when I talk about the story. I don't know if I said it in the chapter about lightning or not, but the experience that I had with lightning when I was a very little girl, I really believe that lightning looked at me and went, I see you. And I'm like, okay. So I think that in that aspect, that it was very valuable for me to write this book in that way, is to really deepen my connection.
Yeah. I think talking about connection and just thinking about in the book about like how you kind of interrelate things, and it's done so well. Like it reminded me so much of like my earth science classes without feeling like I was being talked down to. It's like, do you remember the water cycle? So that was really helpful. But the thing I think is really interesting about it, and it's kind of like that accumulation idea again, and interconnectedness, is that like by the time you get to the hurricane chapter at the end, you're like, hurricanes are all weather. You've got rain and hail and tornadoes and wind, and it's all in this giant, storm. And I was like, I just had never thought about it that way. And then thinking about, it's funny you mentioned a science video. I was thinking of the video about like the nano to the macro, like of what's
Powers
like
of 10.
starts with a human eye,
Powers
like
of 10. Yeah.
Yeah. And like how much our iris looks like a nebula, like these things that are reflected in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, now I get it in a different and real way.
Well, I will tell you a funny, I didn't really make that connection about hurricanes until I started writing that chapter. And I was like, oh. I mean, I kind of knew it, but it never really was like, hey, look at this. Look at this.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a very real thing. And it's funny that you say that about the eye looking like a nebula, because I remember one of my very first aha moments about the interconnectedness of my science and my magical practice was when I was in grad school. Because I'd kind of always been an off the beaten track kid.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew there was a word for it, but I remember very clearly my grandmother handed me this book called 5,000 Years of the Bible. And she said, hey, you need to read this because, I was a little troublemaker and I was asking a lot of questions and that were not appropriate for this, little church that I was taken to as a child. I would ask all these questions like, why doesn't my dog go to heaven? If my dog doesn't go to heaven, I don't think I want to go there either.
Valid
And
question.
so, yeah. And my grandma handed me this book. And of course, I flip over to the section on the Sumerian and Assyrian and Egyptian gods going, hey, what about these ones? What about these guys? Why can't we talk about those? And then very quickly she snatched the book away from me and went, no, that's not the book you need to read. But I think that for me, it's one of those things where the interconnectedness part became really clear to me when I was I remember the moment I was sitting on the little bus that took you, to your apartments, because you can't park anywhere on any university campus ever, because that's how they're designed, is to thwart your parking. I've decided. But, I was riding the little bus and I had gotten out of a nuclear physics class or a class about the nuclear physics of stars, and which I loved. And then I remember I was reading a book on the Kabbalah, and they were talking about the pattern of the tree of life and how it repeated over and over in nature. And we had just talked about how these same structures and forces that exist in the atom and the nucleus extrapolate all the way out to the largest hyperstructures of the universe. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whoa, that's the same thing. That's the same thing. We may not know how they are connected. We may not have the language for it yet. We may not have the technology to understand it yet. But in my mind, those two things are coming at the same answer from two different directions. Yeah. And I've only, and that was sort of my first, like, oh, wow, this is how this works. That was my first connection. And since then, I've just always kind of felt like the more technology advances and the more I deepen my spiritual practice, those two things are just converging to everything is the same thing at the end of the day. Now, there are people that will disagree with that. I have no evidence of that as yet, but 200 years ago, we didn't know about the existence of the electron, and now we live in a world that relies on electronics and electricity to function. Yep. So, who's to say that 200 years from now, there won't be some, leap in technology where we're like, oh my God.
It's magic.
Yeah.
I know so many witchy scientists. Like, it just kind of almost makes sense to me. Like, the more you scratch at the secrets, the more you go, okay, this is bigger than I imagined.
Yes. And that's what I love about it is you can retain your sense of science. To understanding how something works has never reduced my amazement of it and my awe of it. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's made it even greater.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that we even exist at all is amazing, because if it weren't for the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't be here, right? This force that most people have never heard of is the reason that the nucleus of the atom can have more than one proton in it. And that's why we're here. Yeah. So it has never reduced my amazement to understand something more thoroughly. It has always usually served to deepen it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. So are you out as a witch in your academic life, or do you keep those pretty separate?
No, I am. I mean, I made a decision during lockdown I never denied, and I never, if someone was straight up had the nerve to ask me, I would just tell them the truth. I I decided during lockdown after, because I have a lot of students because I'm kind of off the beaten track as a physicist anyway. I have a lot of students that have come to me and see me as more than just an academic mentor. They talk to me about very personal things. And I thought, I'm just going to be who I am. And if people can't handle that, they can choke. What is it? Don't cut yourself into bite-sized pieces kind of thing. So I decided after lockdown that I was just going to kind of come roaring back as who I am, because I had spent a lot of time, and I think a lot of us kind of do this, particularly women, where we try to fit in a certain container that doesn't fit us, but we're forced to fit in this container.
Mm-hmm.
And, I went, why am I doing that? Nothing I am is illegal, immoral, or unhealthy. So, I decided when I came back to just be who I am. So
Mm-hmm.
I, now I have visible tattoos. Now I have visible piercings. I let my hair, I quit trying to color my hair to make myself look a certain way. And so now my hair is white. I came back with I kind of dress like Mrs. Frizzle's older sister who's into goth and probably kink.
I love it. I love it.
And so I came back with loud makeup and unusual clothes. And while I probably own 30 pairs of glasses, thank you, Zenni, not sponsored, but they're cheap and they're cool, with weird shoes. And I just walk down the hall and the students respond. They like it. Mm-hmm. So the other part of that was, I'm like, okay, this is who I am. I'm a witch. I'm queer. I'm poly. I'm all these things. And none of that is illegal or immoral or unhealthy. And it's all consensual. And so here I am. Now, do I walk down the hall waving a flag that says that? Well, kind of, because that's how I wave my own kind of flag, but I don't hide any of that. At my job, they know that I've written this book. And in fact, my boss told me, well, you're really a big proponent of science communication and science in the public. And that's what this book is. So put it on your yearly report of things that you've done. So I'm like, okay.
Nice.
So, because I am pretty good at what I do and I've been there a long time, I think it was a little easier for me to do this, but I have that privilege. I'm tenured, I'm full professor. I have that privilege of, as long as I'm good at my job, there's nothing they can, and I'm not committing felonies in the parking lot. I have the privilege of being able to stand up and go, I am this person. And then it makes it a little easier for the next person to do that. Right. Now, I'm not going to say there hasn't been pushback, because there has. In a couple of cases, there has been a little bit of pushback. And in fact, there was someone who decided to have a little bit of a literal witch hunt about me and try to make me lose my job. And I'm like, being a witch is not illegal.
Yeah.
And so luckily, my supervisors and administration know that I'm good at my job. And they're like, there's nothing wrong with what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they protected me. And now, living in the times we live in, we were speaking before we started recording a little bit about this, living in the times we live in, there is do I have a target on my back? Probably. But I have a target on my back working in higher education in the South anyway. So,
I say a woman in astrophysics, I was imagining, is already kind of puts you in a weird spot.
Yeah, well, and being a woman in this country right now puts you in a weird spot, but that's a conversation for another day. But
we might get to politics later.
Oh, good. Yes. But it's yes. So I guess that's a long way around the barn to say, yes, I am out.
Yeah.
But I know I made the right choice, because I have had so many former students contact me and say, thank you. You made me feel safe to be who I am.
Yeah.
So
that's huge.
I'll take the heat that I get if it makes them feel safe.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. And I know you're in your 50s too. And I think there is something about hitting 50 where you just have very few fucks left to give.
They
right?
flew plumb out the window. They're gone and haven't been seen in many days.
Yeah. But one of the things I find freeing about it is that it's kind of like you. I never really denied it. I didn't wave my flag. I didn't wear a lot of, yes, this is definitely pagan jewelry. I just kind of was the goth girl.
Yeah.
And, if anybody asked me, I would tell them, but I didn't really volunteer that information.
Right.
And when I moved to California, I decided I was going to do this podcast. I was like, well, let's out yourself in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty clear. This is what's going on. I mean, I'd already published books, the fiction books about witches, but fiction, could be anybody, that's not quite the same. But one of the things I thought, and it's so funny you said that, is that, I'm in a position where I'm safe. Like, I'm not going to lose my job. My kids are grown. Nobody's going to try and take my kids away from me. Doesn't it help if we can? And I realize a lot of people are in positions where they cannot be out, and I totally respect that. But if you can, you're right. You make it easier for other people to do what they need to do to be themselves if you are authentically you all the time. And I don't know that it's a duty, but I think if you are in a position where you can do that, it has the potential to help a lot of people way beyond yourself.
I don't want to say it's a duty, but I certainly think it is an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that I realize if you are in a position where you can be safe, and I live in a state where I know people who have trans children. It is not safe for them to be very publicly outspoken.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it is a duty. I do. I feel like it is a duty for me. Now, I'm not going to make other people's decisions for them.
I mean, that's kind of what I was getting to. It's like, I feel like it is, but I don't want to put that on somebody else.
Right. I think that it is that whole trope of, I want to be the person I wish that I'd had around when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so, I don't have children. I don't have any children myself, but I have raised a lot of people's kids being a university professor.
Yeah.
And I'm that professor that they come to when they have been sexually assaulted or when they have been abused by their partner, or, I'm not always that person, but I have had students come to me and or when they're having mental health issues, and I'm the one who walks with them to the counseling center because I know that I can go over there with them and get them straight in to see someone.
Yeah.
To me, if you are in a position where you have the ability to improve the human condition and you don't do it, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, it's like there are a lot of aphorisms and adages about it, but I do think that if you can do it, it's the most that we can do. And sometimes you won't be able to. Sometimes you got to step back, but when you can do it, do it.
Well, that's like, I kind of look at it like when I was fostering, I used to foster dogs, right? I fostered dogs for about 4 years. Fostering animals in the South, it's a never ending thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because people down here just regard animals as something they have dominion over. And I say that with all the possible sarcasm in the world, or they see them as property and nobody's going to tell me that I got to cut my dog's balls off or whatever. And it's a never ending thing, and it will eat you alive. And so during my time, I fostered over 400 dogs. I helped 400 dogs find homes.
Wow.
I was done. By the time it was over, I hated humanity so much. So you have to, you cannot be an effective advocate if you yourself are not well within your being, right? So, if you are, I think what it has challenged me to do is to work on myself and get well within my being. And that's an ongoing process, right? We're never done working on ourselves. We're never done examining our shadow self, right? But if I have the ability to make change, I mean, and it's not about, and people are like, well, I can't make any influence. I don't have money. I don't have this. The things I have done have rarely cost me any money. It has only cost me time and empathy and energy. And so if I'm able to make that change, and you're like, well, it only affects one person. Yeah, but how do you know how many people that person's going to affect?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So it is part of my sacred duty. I see that as part of my spiritual practice, is to be able to stand up and go, this is my authentic self. Here I am. And while you may not be in a safe position to do this right now, there will come a time when you can.
A better world is possible.
Right. Oh boy, I hope. Whew, Lord have mercy.
I hope so too. It's funny. I'm always the optimist in my family. Like I want to believe, I want to hope. And I saw something online the other day about anger is a symptom of hope. And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, that just hit hard, because I was like, yeah, I mean, if you're past hope, there's not even emotion to be angry.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so it's not a bad thing that I'm just angry all the time.
Well, I mean, if you're not angry at the things that go on in this world, you are just not paying attention. And I mean, and I have to self-select. Like, I spent a lot of time being and I still am, about things. I have to pick my battles.
Yeah.
I am aware of all of the things that are going on in the world. I know, and I do what I can to get that information out there, but I can't. It's also like with fostering dogs. I can't save everything. I couldn't save them all. I had to sometimes go, I see that. That is heartbreaking. I acknowledge that that's a terrible situation, but that is the limit of what my resources I have available can do.
Yeah.
Because right now, since, 2016, even before then, we're seeing this, somebody done kicked that rock over, and all that ugly shit that was living under it is scrambling around in the light right now. Yeah. And it needs to go away.
Yeah.
But you can't step on all those bugs.
No. And it's just like you said, there is a limit to our resources, financially, emotionally, physically. We all have limits. And I really like the idea of like picking the thing that you feel passionate about and feel like you can move the needle on, and being assured that someone else will pick those other things.
Right. Well, because really and truly, and my friend Krista Chapman Gray, she's a pagan musician that a lot of people may have heard of, but my only influence is basically ends at my property line. But being a university professor, I do have a slightly larger sphere of influence, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I can only affect what's within my immediate vicinity. Most of us do not have the power to make huge change, right? What we have the power to do is to move the needle in our local bubble, right? And I think I have done that with some people. I hope that I have. I think I've done that with some students. I hope that I have. But if you try to look at the global issue and try to move those needles, you are just like, is it Sisyphus, the one that's rolling the rock up the hill? And that rock's just going to roll right over you and come right back down.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to sit down there and roll little rocks up the hill, as much as I can.
I think you're right, though. I think it makes a difference. And I was thinking, it's funny. I was thinking about like your local influence, and I was like, it's kind of like the weather thing too. Like one of the things you talk about in the book is putting like the cutting spell for like storms, like either knife or axe, or I know there's lots of different traditions about it. I do love that you kind of trace it back to Serbia. I always wondered where it came from.
Yeah.
But that, in cutting the storm, you don't want to inflict that on somebody else. So part of your job as a witch or a magic practitioner, however you call yourself, is to diminish the storm, not just send it to your neighbor.
Right. Yeah. Although I've got some neighbors I wouldn't mind if it went there. But yeah, I mean, so you have to be accountable. I mean, but it's also, it's one of those things where somebody questioned me about doing weather magic at all, because they're like, oh, well, if you ask it to rain, how do you know you're not messing up somebody's wedding day? And I'm like, I don't know that. But it's just like when you pray for a job or you do magic for a job or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you get that job, someone else who probably needed it just as bad as you didn't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, so we all we can do is mitigate as best as we can, right? But yes, I mean, the storm cutting spell, I always try to include when I do that. Let's just, we need rain. Okay, that's fine. But we don't need, a tornado. We don't need hail. So can we just calm ourselves down just a little bit? So I always put that in there to try to calm the storms down. And yes. And I mean, and like, I'm never going to try to stop a hurricane from coming somewhere because that's beyond the scope of my ability, but if I can create a pocket of protection, great. That's what I'll do.
Yeah.
But I also can tap into the energy of that hurricane that's happening to do other forms of magical work. And that was what I really wanted to do with this book. It's not just do I need it to rain, or, I don't want it to storm, or, whatever. There's energy out there. And if you're an energy practitioner, whether you're a witch or you're a yoga practitioner or you're a Reiki practitioner, or you do angelic healing practices, all of those things draw on energy. And while people like to say that, that's not the same energy, energy's energy to me.
Yeah. That's science coming in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I did love the idea of like, don't go confront a tornado.
Yes, please don't do that. Although we all do that. We all stand out there and look at
But think about like ways that you can utilize. I loved the idea of using like tornado felled trees, the wood from trees to make magical tools and things like that. I was like, yes, this all makes sense to me, to work with these things that seem so destructive to the point that it's like, do they want us here? Like, but at the same time, they're just part of the natural phenomenon of our planet, and we have to live with them. So how can we work with that energy?
Right. I consider weather to be a partner. If you try to treat weather like an adversary, you will lose every single time.
Yes.
Weather doesn't have any ego, and it does not care about your ego. It's, weather doesn't have any ego. It is transcended. We talk in yoga class, just, my boyfriend's a yoga instructor, and he was talking just the other day about letting go of your ego to be able to do certain yoga poses. Because one of my issues with yoga is I don't have a yoga body, as I say that again with all the sarcasm in the world. And so trying to do certain poses, some people would say, you look like two hogs fighting in a toe sack. But you have to let go of your ego and go, this is not about how I look. This is about what benefit this gives me physically and energetically and spiritually. Weather doesn't have an ego. It just is doing what it needs to do to what it's considering bringing the planet into balance. And tornadoes, while they are incredibly destructive, they also, have, like I talked about with hurricanes too. Hurricanes often cleanse an environment, right? And I'm not saying that in terms of like getting rid of the people. I'm just saying they
or like breaking up the red tide.
Right. They break up the red tide. Tornadoes, sometimes they will clear out an area of the national forest, and flowers that have not bloomed in decades will bloom. It's, so weather doesn't have an agenda. It just is.
Yeah.
Right. And so, the floods that we rail against are also the things that make the bottomlands fertile.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where you have to quit looking at it in terms of your ego and just see it for the process that it is, I think. So
yeah.
And that's the other thing that I wanted to get across to people is, yes, these are, yeah, I mean, I live in the South. When there's a tornado warning, half the time we're looking out the window going, where is it? Well, I don't see it. Let's go look for it, and until you've actually run into one, and then you're like, I don't want to do that anymore.
Don't need to do that again. Yeah.
Don't need to do that again. But I think that, being able to see it again as an awe-inspiring phenomenon is more of what I want people to get. I know that, it is, and the fact of the matter is, a lot of times, like when we talk about flooding and stuff like that, we can rail against flooding. Well, we've built cities in places
it's on us largely.
That's on a floodplain.
Right.
Whatever your beliefs about climate change may or may not be, we have altered the climate of this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And that is starting to turn around and bite us in the butt. It's one of those things where for me, weather you have to work with it as an ally. Mm-hmm. Like as a farmer, I'm that person that's got 3 weather apps on their phone, and I'm looking at all 3 of them and like averaging them in my head. And then if it says, I have to prepare, I have to assume the weather's going to be at least as bad as what they say, if not worse, because I have cattle and I have horses, and at one point I had chickens and rabbits and all the things. So when it said there's going to be winter weather, for example, I said, okay, I'm going to have to assume it's going to be at least as bad as they say, because these animals are counting on me to survive.
Right.
And so, but rather than raging against it, I'm like, okay, you've given me, technology has given me the warning that this thing could be this bad. Let me make my preparations. And part of my preparations are magical. Part of my preparations are my wards and my protection spells and my and things that I do. But I think that, nature is just nature. It is never out to get us. It is never, trying to intentionally come after us. It's just, here we are, and we got to deal with it.
Yeah. I think it's one of the slight potholes of animism. If you don't pay attention and don't think about it, you can very easily just shift over into anthropomorphizing and giving these other beings human, motivations and all that. That's not really true. Like they have their own thing.
Right. So. And I mean, if you study nature, you see that humans are sort of unique in a lot of our, shall we say, less palatable traits.
Yeah.
So we can't project that onto that storm over there. It's not jealous or vengeful or whatever. It's just doing it. It's being a storm.
Cool. So like I said, we try to keep it to an hour. Not always successful. My editor will tell you. But before we get to our last question, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of plug what's happened. Like this will come out mid-August.
Okay.
And just what's up on tap for you, or where people can find you.
Okay. Well, in mid-August. So the first thing that would be up in August is I am going to be at the Frosted Moon Festival in London, Arkansas, not London, England, but London, Arkansas. It is a 3-day festival, Labor Day weekend, and it is music and vendors and classes, and it's outdoors. So it is outdoors in August in Arkansas. So, bring a fan, bring a fan. But it is at Hidden Acres Farm in London, Arkansas. It is a beautiful 60 to 80 acre property, very magical place. There's going to be some amazing, like I said, classes and vendors there. It's a very inclusive environment. It's not, we always say, even though Pride Month is July, we're always prideful out here at Hidden Acres Farm. So it's a very inclusive environment. Also in August, I believe actually before Frosted Moon, the weekend before, I will be in Fayetteville, Arkansas at the Enchanted Metaphysics and Mystics Market, where I will be teaching classes. I'll also be vending with my bone art business, Stories of the Bones. That is on a Friday and a Saturday. And I think Fayetteville Town Center is where that is. You can check my author page on Llewellyn for exact locations, but that's in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Then after Labor Day weekend, the next weekend, I will be in Pennsylvania at Anahata's Purpose. I am teaching at Anahata's Purpose, which is I'm very excited about. Actually, some of my Arkansas friends told me about it because they love going up there. So I will be teaching connecting to our inner weather witches at Anahata's Purpose. Then the next thing that I know for sure I have scheduled is Nashville Pagan Pride, which is the first weekend of October. I will be speaking and vending at that as well. And then in November, we come back around to the Enchanted Metaphysics and Mystics Market in November, which will be in Conway, Arkansas. Then she has 4 of those a year. 2 of them are in Conway, and then the other 2 are at different locations around the state. But that'll be 50 plus vendors, 2 days of classes and music, and it's a beautiful event, and you should come out. So right now, that's all that I know of. So, but you can always go to my author page on Llewellyn.com, or you can follow me on Facebook. It's Debra Burris, author, teacher, witch, and I will publish, where I'm going to be on there. You can follow my bone art page, which is Stories of the Bones, and I publish on there where I'm going to be. I'm not very good. I didn't do the good branding thing where I've got one name for everything. So I've kind of got, because I kind of came at this, backwards. And so I'll
put links to the socials and stuff in the notes so people can find all that.
Yeah.
So our last question is a tiny game of chance.
Okay.
And I'm going to roll a die.
Okay.
And depending on what number I roll, you will get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money.
Okay.
And if I roll a 6, you get to pick, and you can pass if you don't want that thing. And so these are questions written for you, written specifically for you.
Oh, fun.
So 6, you get to pick.
So it was death, sex, religion,
politics or money.
Let's go with sex. Why not? Always go with sex when you have the opportunity.
Oh, that's great. I need to at some point go through and do like a statistical array of like when people get a 6, which one they pick, because it's almost always sex.
Yeah.
But I have to say it's hard to write a sex question about weather. So I was thinking, I was like, I don't know what to ask about sex, but I was thinking like for you, maybe like, what's the sexiest weather? I know that sounds silly, but I feel like weather impacts our mood so much. Maybe it's not silly.
Oh boy, that's hard to say because I think that's very situational. I think that one of my, and I'm laughing because this happened recently. One of my favorite times to have really good hot sex is during a thunderstorm, because I have a metal roof on my house and there's nothing like the sound of rain on a metal roof. But nice snuggly snow days when you can snuggle up with someone and be warm and cozy, or be out in the snow and having fun. I may or may not have hiked in like a light misty rain in the Ozarks and ended up doing precarious things in the national forest that probably would be illegal if we got caught. I kind of like all weather. I mean, probably, during a tornado would be a bad time.
Yes. Unless you're into like being scared to death.
Well, or you're in your safe room, right? Like if you're in your safe room, that's probably okay. But to me, I don't know. I think kind of all weather is sexy, but I think thunderstorms would probably be my go-to. Yeah. My go-to for that. Yeah.
So it's so funny. I mean, growing up in the South, in East Tennessee, thunderstorms, regular, part of life. Where I'm in California, I think I've heard thunder one time in 3 years.
I'd be so sad.
It's so, it's the thing that you wouldn't even think you would miss.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went home, I've mostly been home in the fall when there's not as many big storms. It's usually spring and summer. And, but when I went home last fall, I was home in November, and there was just this day of like hard soaking rain with like very occasional thunder, like one of those just like little pop-up kind of storms that turned into like, I'm going to stick around for a while.
Right.
And I was like, thank you. I just needed a day.
Yeah, you just needed to hear that sound again. You just need to hear that sound.
And having a metal roof is, that is It's
I
like
love the sound of a metal roof when it rains.
Yeah.
Now, when it's hailing, I don't like it so much, but
that's scary. Yeah. We have had hail out here once, which I thought was weird. I didn't know they got hail in California. Apparently it's pretty rare, but the weather's broken. So yeah.
Yeah. But I would have to say that would be my choice for sexy weather. But I like all, I mean, I like all weather. So,
Anytime is a good time.
Anytime is a good time.
Especially a good time.
Especially good times.
No, that's perfect. Oh, Deborah, thank you so much for coming on. I've so enjoyed talking with you. And I just really love the book. And I really recommend it to people. Even if weather isn't your particular interest, I think the thing that you do about weaving the wonder of scientific discovery and magic together is so beautifully done.
Thank you.
That I would just recommend it to people who are that's how their brains work. I mean, I know so many witchy people who are scientists, like I said, or who are just fascinated by science and don't really see magic as outside of that paradigm, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So that means a lot that you say that, because that's what I was hoping to do. And, my boyfriend got the very first signed copy and he was reading. He's like, I can hear your voice when I read this. Nice. So I'm like, oh, good. That's what I wanted. So thank you. That means a lot. And I've had a great time. It's wonderful to be on here and talk with you. This has been a blast. So,
oh, great. Thanks. WitchLit is a production of 1000 Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.